We are so excited to partner with WellSet and bring Lisa with us to talk about gratitude and the psychology of happiness today. Lisa has been a counselor, healer, and lecturer in the field of social services, personal wellness, and healing arts for over 17 years. She's an amazing human being and a beautiful soul, and we're so excited to have her here. So I'm going to let Lisa take it away.
Thank you, Ashley. So appreciate that. And I just want to say a big shout out of gratitude to the Holistic Healer Collective and WellSet for putting on these really amazing, wonderful, and much needed programs for all of us here collectively. And as Ashley was just mentioning, in some ways I know there's a lot going on right now in our world, but there are so many ways that we can reach out and connect and to really support each other right now. So I feel like what we're doing here is, one small action in a larger set of actions that can really bring us all together. So thank you. And without further ado, welcome to Gratitude and the Psychology of Happiness. Definitely a topic I thought would be a really good one right now. So as Ashley mentioned, I am a counselor. I have a master's degree in social work, and I've been in the field for almost 18 years. And one of the places that I actually received some training is a school called the University of Pennsylvania. And the reason why I mention that is because I'm going to take us through a couple of slides here that I studied positive psychology as part of my training. And one of the founders of this particular movement in psychology, his name is Dr. Martin Seligman. He's been researching this theory and this field of happiness for many decades. I believe he started researching in the 70s and has been very active through the 2000s as well. And so one of the things I wanted to just start off with is a definition for you of what is positive psychology. How can we define something like that? And honestly, if you were to ask, let's say, a handful of different psychologists or social workers or counselors what positive psychology is, you'll probably get a different response from each person because it encompasses so many different ways of how to define well-being. But there's one definition that I thought was just kind of the umbrella term for it, and it's by the scientist Peterson, who in 2008 wrote some research around it and said positive psychology ultimately is the scientific study of what makes life most worth living. So I think those are really powerful words of, what is this that we're interested and fascinated in learning more about the way that we live. So what I really like about positive psychology is that unlike some other areas of psychology, which are certainly very necessary, but very different, it doesn't focus on what's not working. It doesn't focus on problems or what we might call pathologies. So there's not really a diagnosis that people are going to get if they're seeing someone who works in positive psychology. What you will most likely find is that a counselor who specializes in this type of study will actually look to find out what is working. They will assess what might be personal strengths instead of weaknesses, and they encourage optimism and focus on, resiliency. And there's just something really beautiful, I think, about the balance of both of them. I think both are certainly needed. But when we do focus on what's working and what we have going for us and what our personal strengths are, I think that we can really leverage that and really use that to help us through some of those adverse times. And so I think for a time like today, this is just such a timely and perfect topic. So I'm really excited to share with you quite a bit about it. I'll take you through some studies on psychology and the power of gratitude. We'll do a couple of short exercises, and I can't wait to hear feedback from all of you. So I think we're going to have a really sweet time together here. But I want to take a moment and just talk about this idea of optimism. So optimism is that sense of when you're looking at the world and perceiving it, that you're focusing on, the stuff that's good, right? So we're not thinking of the things that may go wrong or what's not working. We're looking forward to what is going to be positive. And sometimes I've worked with clients and they'll say to me, Lisa, I really want to be more optimistic. I really want to see the world with, much more positivity. But I find myself, reverting back to fear or reverting back to things that I'm worried about, or I'll feel really cynical and I'm not sure I can get there. And I just want to say a little caveat about that. Some of my clients have said, I'm not sure I'll ever be able to get to optimism. The good news, though, about that is actually research shows that we can actually shift our perspective with small moments in time of retraining the way that our brain scans for patterns. And so optimism isn't a trait that you're born with. And so if you didn't get the gene, well, oh boy, you're out of luck. It's actually something that we can learn. So that's really great news, because that's really empowering. So we can shift towards more optimism versus pessimism. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So I want to just jump in a little bit more about Dr. Seligman, because he is definitely the founding father of positive psychology, and he's just done so much research on it that I wanted to share a little bit more about his model. And so he came up with something he called the PERMA model. And that's just an abbreviation for some different features of what he thought would really encompass a more comprehensive idea of what it is to be happy and to have that sense of well-being. And so he thought there would be, several pieces to the puzzle. And one of those important pieces is positive emotions. So that would be the P for the PERMA. And of course, that I think makes sense, right? So when we feel good, when we feel happy, when we have an experience of joy, that's going to help radiate through our whole perspective and how we're viewing life. So certainly an important piece. But interestingly enough, just as important, he found that engagement was also really vital. And by that, he meant we also need to think beyond just our own personal emotional state and what brings us joy and how we can see something even bigger than ourselves. So when we're engaged with other people or with projects or with things that we have a lot of passion for, that's also going to raise our bar of how we feel, right? And it's going to increase our well-being. So another part of this mosaic is positive relationships. And that's certainly, I think, something that is really being highlighted right now for all of us, right? We're all living in this very challenging and uncertain time with the virus. And although we may have to physically distance for safety, we can also spend some time, though, finding new and innovative ways to connect, just like today, just like our class that we're doing right now. And I believe it was Angela who was on our chat here mentioned that transformational connections can happen even if we have to physically distance ourselves. So positive relationships are really important. And also a sense of meaning, right? So when we're involved in something that we feel really enthusiastic about, have passion for, feel inspired by, that's also part of that overall well-being. And then lastly, he thought a sense of accomplishment, right? When we put together something that we're really proud of, or we feel like we've contributed in a way that's just beyond our own experience, all of these pieces come together to bring together that model of happiness. So I just like to introduce that so that we're all kind of thinking about it as more like a mosaic or pieces that come together versus just one, dimensional side of what happiness looks like. So it's definitely multi-dimensional according to Dr. Seligman. So next I want to talk about the power of positive psychology. And I do want to just say, pause here for a moment. If anyone has questions about anything that you're seeing on the slide or that I'm mentioning, feel free to type it in and I'll try to answer them as we go through the program. But if I don't get to it now, I'll try to also circle back in a little bit to make sure I get everybody's questions. And then at the end, I'll also designate just a few minutes of, questions and stuff. So the power of positive psychology, I really love the way that just even makes me feel happy just saying that. There's just something in that word positive. So Dr. Seligman also started researching on what he found were the traits that he saw most often when people were describing feeling really happy, feeling really content, and having that sense of just, goodness in their lives. And these traits that I have listed, I do want to mention they're not in order of importance. So it's not that courage is the most important, but that they're all important. So the things he found were helping people move towards happiness were a sense of having courage, of having honesty or truthfulness in their life, having optimism, which we mentioned a little bit ago, perseverance or even resiliency, hope, and lastly, gratitude. So I think all of these make sense why those would help all of us feel like we had tools, right, to move us towards a sense of happiness. What I'm going to focus on most today, though, is gratitude. I find gratitude such an interesting thing to not only study, but to work with in my own personal life, that I wanted to do a little bit more of a deeper dive into gratitude. So let's dig in here. What I wanted to share with you is that there's actually a lot of scientific research on positivity and gratitude. And I know sometimes it's easy to just say, oh, just try to count your blessings, be thankful. Let's, focus on the positive. And we say that, and it might become, more like just something people say offhandedly, but there's actually a lot of research that supports the reason why these things make sense and why we can actually feel better when we do them. So gratitude is actually a really interesting word. So it comes from the Latin gratia. And you may have heard that actually sounds like the word gracious. And when somebody is gracious, they have that sense of being in appreciation for something. So gratitude is that sense of being thankful, of appreciating. And when we're in that state, we actually can savor positive or good experiences more. It can help us feel more positive, and interestingly, can improve our health as well. So there's actually a physical response that happens when we're in a state of gratitude. And it can also help us cope with when things are challenging, when things feel like they have, more problems or there's adversity going on. So I thought today we can practice some interesting exercises about getting into a state of gratitude. But let me first share with you some research about it. So essentially, the more that we focus on things that make us happy or that make us feel that we're in that state of gratitude, the better we feel. So it's kind of like a win-win situation here. And so research on positivity and gratitude shows that we can actually experience a greater achievement of success when we embrace positive emotions. And that actually came from a study in 2005. So when we experience positive emotions, we have more of a chance to succeed. And I think that makes sense, right? When we're passionate, when we're motivated, when we're feeling good about something, we have the fuel, we have the energy to move us forward through processes and hopefully get to that point of achievement. So I think that, that makes sense to me. Another one is, and this is a study in 2012, so this is a little bit more recent, that when we have positivity towards others, not only does it boost our own well-being, but it also increases acceptance from our peers. So again, another win-win situation. So when we do things that are, good towards each other, we actually are setting up a community feeling of goodness. So it's like passing it forward. And I think that's really important to think about. Right now, I've been reading so many stories that have really touched me about what people are doing to help out in the community during this time of the coronavirus. And I know you probably have heard of some of these stories, but for instance, in Italy, even though they're also physically isolating and not being able to move around freely, like we are as well, people are singing from their balconies so that people don't feel quite as alone and so that they can still have that sense of community. And here, I'm streaming here from the Bay Area, and in Marin County, where I am in, we're actually doing a community howl at 8 p.m. And the reason why we're doing it is to thank our healthcare workers who are on the front lines. So these are just little things that we're doing to just say, hey, we care about each other, we want to show appreciation, and we really want to connect with our community. So it's really amazing, some of the amazing things that are happening. I found this really heart endearing. In Canada, they have this thing, and they're calling it the candemic instead of the pandemic, because they're challenging all of their citizens to find one thing that they can do to support someone in their community. And it's hashtag, pandemic. And I just thought that was really cool. They're taking something, of course, that's really challenging, and they're saying, hey, let's get together and do something that we can do. So people are donating groceries or supplies or checking in on neighbors who might not have family, or, just being a good neighbor. So these are all little things that we can do to help boost our well-being, but also our community. So very timely. And then in 2012, that's another study here, they found that by volunteering, so giving of your time, improves well-being, life satisfaction, and here's something even very special, can reduce symptoms of depression. And I thought, wow, that's, really profound. So when we give of ourselves, we can definitely, certainly have our own positive biofeedback for our own health systems and body, but we may also be able to reduce, emotional states like depression. That was really impressive to me. We have a question here. So it says, can you speak more to the positive emotion part of the theory? The other emotions besides happiness play an important and sometimes vital role in living an authentic life. How does this fit into the model? So the question, I think, is focusing on, other emotions besides happiness. And I think that's a really good point. So before I move on to that last study, I'll just reference back what the question is asking. So certainly in the human spectrum of emotion, there are a lot of different things that we can feel. And happiness is certainly one of them. And that's certainly what we're focusing on here in the presentation today. But again, I would say that the field of positive psychology is really vast. And there's actually a lot of research out there. And so there's lots of states that were being researched. And so happiness and positivity and gratitude is just one small subset. For instance, I'm not really touching so much on humor, but that's certainly part of the model as well. So yeah, I definitely say yes, there is definitely other emotions besides gratitude that is, studied, but I just didn't focus on it for this particular class. But if you are interested, there's a wonderful resource online. So the University of Pennsylvania has an entire section dedicated on their website to Dr. Seligman and his work on positive psychology. So if you're interested in looking at some of the other topics that they've covered, I would suggest that would be a really great place to start. The other thing that positive psychology really likes to focus on is actually two subsets. One is the idea of resiliency, and that is definitely a big topic to talk about. And then the other thing is something called flourishing, which is when someone is in an optimal state, and we call that thriving. And so those are some other states that are definitely studied. So really good question there. Okay, and then lastly, another study came out in 2012, which, boy, that was a really active year for positivity research. And it says that small, simple actions can have a big impact on our happiness. And so even little efforts can produce substantially happier experiences in our lives. So I think that's a really interesting thing to think about. When I've worked with some clients who've wanted to bring more positive approaches into their life, they would, try to brainstorm these really huge, big undertakings of positivity, like I'm going to, fundraise for a year, and I'm going to set up a school that's going to help people. And although that's really wonderful, and I totally encourage that project, I was trying to get them to do smaller things in the little moments of time more frequently to help start shifting them towards that more positive mindset. So I just want to give you that idea of it doesn't have to be huge gestures. It can be small, efforts over little moments that can make a big impression and really change some things. So just want to pause here for a moment and find out if anyone had any other questions about some of these studies, and if there's other things that you have that you want me to speak on before we move to the next part. And thank you, by the way, for that question, Angela. That was really great. Okay, before we move on to the next slide, I just wanted to just take another moment because I do want to also speak to just that I know right now is a time of a lot of anxiety and uncertainty, and that makes sense. You know, we're dealing with something that we've never seen before. We have this brand new virus, and you know, it's making a lot of people sick, and there's a lot going on. I know that a lot of us are feeling grief and anxiety and stress. We're changing our lives. You know, we've had a lot that we've had to tackle as a society over the last few months. And I know that it can feel really scary and isolating. And so what I want to speak to about that is that it's okay, whatever you're feeling. That's why we have the spectrum of human emotions. So, you know, it's okay to have all those feelings come up, and that this webinar is not meant to say, oh, we should only feel positive, or we should only feel happy, or we should try to get to that state of optimism. What I'm really wanting to share about it is that I want to give you these tools that you can utilize when you start to feel, you know, overwhelmed or really scared or really anxious. That you don't have to feel this way all the time, but that you can utilize some of it to say, okay, I really would like to shift out of this feeling of fear that I'm, you know, currently in, or wow, I feel really depressed. I'm really worried about my loved ones. I wonder if I can move into a moment of gratitude. So I just want to mention that this is not to say that we should put on rose-colored glasses and look at the word only through this positive way, but that we can utilize it. We have a question. What was the companion to flourishing? Oh, so the companion to flourishing was this idea of resilience. And it's the idea that human beings are, you know, unbelievably adaptive and innovative, and that we are actually built to weather adversity, that we have tools, that we have strengths, that we have that bandwidth, that we can move through life even though there's difficulty. And so there is a lot of research on what makes someone resilient. Why are some people seemingly more resilient than others? Is it a learned trait? Is it something that you can build and enhance? So that would be the second part there. Yeah, very popular, very relevant topic, especially right now. So thank you for mentioning that. Any other questions before I move on to the next part? Okay. So I'm going to start doing a little bit of a deeper dive on gratitude, because that's really what I wanted to build this presentation around. And so one thing that, you know, I thought was important to just share is that sometimes by starting to do something that is of gratitude, we actually can change our mind state. So let's say you wake up and you're in a really bad mood and just things are not going your way, and it just starts to snowball. You know, maybe it's lunchtime and you're really grumpy, and, you know, the evening comes around and you just can't seem to get a footing of feeling good. That you can start to use little things like this to start shifting your perspective or your mindset. And so gratitude is really powerful that way. It's one of those things that the more that we do of it, the exponential the rate of how we feel. So one, you know, option is that, and I know this may be a little bit tricky sometimes, but if we have the time to actually sit down and write a thank you note. I know that's not something that we have a lot of time to do as much. So if you don't have time to write, even the practice of thanking someone mentally, like even in your mind, can actually be one of those catalysts to start this idea of moving towards a state of gratitude. One thing that is also really helpful, and I love doing this, is if I'm in a real, you know, grumpy mood or something, and I want to shift out of that mind state, I might think back to something that was really positive. Maybe a really gorgeous day at the beach where I was really relaxed and enjoying being in nature. And I would take that memory and I would just put myself in that scene and just really savor, you know, that. I'm like, wow, we live in such a beautiful place, or I really enjoyed feeling the sun, or wow, the sound of the waves was just so relaxing. And by savoring that memory, our physiology actually reacts to that state. It's really amazing. Some of you probably have heard of Anthony Robbins, who's a really popular coach, and he has a lot of classes and webinars, and he does a whole coaching program and live events and books. And he actually talks about when we change our mindset, we change our physiology. So by moving into a positive state, our body starts to relax. And I don't know if you've noticed it, but when stress starts to rise in a human's body, one of the first things that happens is that the breath starts getting really shallow. And we might start breathing more rapidly and not taking in as much oxygen as we would have if we were in a more relaxed state. And so when we take a moment to actually slow down and do something like savoring a memory, our body will react with more relaxation. It's actually called a relaxation response. And there was a professor at Harvard named Dr. Benson, and he studied this relaxation response. And he found that when people would get into a state of stress, or what we'd call, fight or freeze or flee, that by bringing that extra oxygen and relaxing our breath, we could actually reset that stress response. So it's really powerful, just thinking about a positive memory, breathing, and just getting into that state of relaxation. And gratitude certainly helps. Another idea is to count blessings. This, of course, is something I think we hear all the time, is that, what is going well in life? There might be some things that aren't going very well or that are problematic, but I'm sure that we can always find at least one thing, right, that we can count our blessings. Get creative. I like this one because I like thinking of different ways to bring gratitude into my life. So one idea is to do something like a blessing jar, and you can decorate it, you can make it really beautiful, and it could be a place where when you do have a sense of thankfulness or appreciation, you can write down that thought or that memory and put it in your jar. And then when you're having a tough day, bring out the jar and start reading some of those blessings or those wonderful memories, and that should help to lift your spirit as well. Thankfulness art. So if you're creative and you like making art, you can actually make gratitude art, or actually an altar, something that could be really powerful, where maybe you put things that bring you joy, something beautiful, maybe candles, whatever you like, and that could be a place where you just go and commune with the things that are going to uplift you. So lots of interesting ideas. Does anyone have other ideas that they'd like to share? Oh, someone said, I do a gratitude calendar daily with a minimum of 5 things. That's awesome. And sometimes teach a gratitude class at church and have participants write thank you notes. Old school. Hey, old school works, man. That's great. Great ideas there. I love that. Any other thoughts? Any other gratitude active ideas here? So sharing appreciation, and that could look a lot of different ways. Gratitude journals, as you mentioned, that can be a really powerful way to capture things in a day. And then also we talked about volunteering in the studies. So donating your time, your skills, your knowledge, could be also gifts or materials, anything like that would certainly be an active way to embrace gratitude. Not to mention that can also have really positive health benefits and reduce depression. So some great stuff to do. From Angela here, we have sharing some of my favorite moments and gratitude with others. Yes, there's something really powerful when we can even connect and share with other people as well. I think it does multiply the effect of how good it feels. Thank you. Any other ideas about embracing gratitude? I really love when people have other things that they're working on. Meditating while holding my puppy and feeling gratitude for the little guy. Yes, animals. Animals can bring such joy to our lives and really uplift that sense of being happy and feeling gratitude. The 5-minute gratitude journal. Ooh, that sounds really interesting. I'll have to look more into that one. Yeah. From Ryan here, I love to speak at least 3 things I'm grateful for out loud as soon as I wake up. Oh, wow. That's really beautiful. I might have to adopt that. One thing I've been doing is actually, as I fall asleep at night, do a few things that I'm grateful for. I really want it to be the vibration that I'm in as I'm drifting off to sleep. But I love the idea of also starting the day that way. Wow, thank you for sharing that. Someone has written, if I have a challenging encounter, I write a gratitude note for my jar about what it taught me. Ooh, and the gift of growth. Wow, that's powerful transformation. I really like that because, oftentimes there are usually silver linings to something, even in a difficult exchange or a moment of time. So to find something grateful is really, really powerful. Thank you. Giving thanks to the past and the present. Oh, wow, that's really wonderful. Someone else says, whenever I have a negative thought, I try to note that feeling and then immediately follow up with a positive thought about that person or that situation. Or think of another situation where I felt positive so I can reset to a positive note. Wow, I love that too. I mean, you guys are amazing. I mean, this is transformational. What I really love about gratitude is that the vibration of it is such a high vibration that negativity, it's almost like if you were in a video game and your tool to sort of move around in the landscape is a gratitude gun. Oh my goodness, gratitude is going to win every time. It's such a powerful state. It can dissolve negative states. And they do show that through research, that by moving into appreciation, that we can really shift some major things. So these are amazing. You guys are amazing. Wow. Feel free to keep them coming. I'm going to just move us into another slide, and then as more people share, I'll be happy to respond to those things. So many of you may have heard of a wonderful gentleman by the name of Dr. Emoto. He was known for what we call studies on water, and he wrote this beautiful book called Messages from Water. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is that he loved to try out different sentences and phrases, and he would put them with a glass of water, and he wondered what the vibration of different things would do to the crystalline way that water is. And so he was really touched when he did this. So he would do all sorts of stuff. He would play music to the water, and he would do all different kinds, from classical to hard rock and death metal. He would write, really beautiful complimentary things like thank you and love and gratitude. And then on the other spectrum, other words and negative emotions as well. And what he noticed is that the water would respond. And when he utilized things like appreciation and love and gratitude, the water structure would turn out to be these beautiful crystalline shapes. And so what I wanted to share with you is what happened when he wrote thank you on a glass of water. And look how beautiful the water crystals arranged themselves. I mean, I'm really touched by that. And so I wanted to just say that, if we imagine that we are, what is it, like 70-something% water, and we share gratitude for ourselves and appreciation and thank ourselves, that the water in our body is going to respond to that. And it's really amazing what happens. So these beautiful crystalline shapes come out. When he would use words that were not as positive, like hatred or, disgust or whatever negative word you can think of, the water would actually be really ragged and jagged, and it wouldn't be fully formed. And it's like the water was reacting to the vibration of the word. So words are really powerful. And so I wanted to just share with you that image of thank you. Someone else has a comment here. So speaking out loud what I'm grateful for and thanking my body, and speaking specifically to different parts, thanking and giving gratitude for their functions. Well, that's such a perfect segue. I couldn't have asked you for a more timely comment with, I've been talking a lot about giving gratitude for things in our external world, but I also think it's really important to give gratitude for our body and ourself and our mind, and send it as much to ourselves as we're sending it out to the world. So thank you. So yeah, has anyone else read about Dr. Emoto's research or had any thoughts about the power of words with regard to energy and vibration? I really love that kind of work. And this is something that also really touched me. Apparently, when Dr. Emoto passed away, which was in 2014, his last words were thank you. So they were of gratitude. Very special. Another person said, I love Emoto's research. It goes to show how our words can carry vibrations that not only affect us, but everyone we speak to. Absolutely. Oh, someone said that they used to put stickers with words like love on our water bottles. Yeah. Yes, talking to plants. Absolutely. Someone mentioned about, it became very popular in the 70s, but talking to plants. So we're all living beings and we respond to those vibrations. So yeah, absolutely. We can utilize this in all of our interactions with all living beings. Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to switch gears here just a little bit. And I want to talk with you about something that is called the Tetris Effect. I know, I haven't thought about that game in a while. So for those of you who haven't heard of that, but it was a very popular video game, Tetris was this idea where you basically had to make order out of chaos. All these puzzle pieces would move down the screen, and the idea was to start organizing them into blocks that fit together so that they would dissolve and you would get through different levels of a game. And so here's an interesting thing about that. So Tetris was such a popular game, and it's the idea of your brain is being asked to look for patterns. You want to find patterns where different pieces are going to fit together. And there was a gentleman by the name of Sean Acor, and he was a student at Harvard, and he completed a book that's called The Happiness Advantage. So some of you may have heard of that. And he has a really popular TED Talk also by the name of The Happiness Advantage. So if you're interested in learning a little bit about him and the work he does on happiness, definitely check out the TED Talk. It's really great. But anyhow, in his book, he actually decided that he wanted to study different ways that we can not only change our mindsets to one that is more happy, but also how we can utilize that in the business world, in our creative, worlds, and just, really comprehensive way of doing things. And so he liked to use Tetris as a metaphor for saying that we can actually train our brain to scan for good things. So just like in the game, you were training your brain to look for patterns, we're training our brain to look for positivity. And so he would say, instead of dwelling on what's not working or what's problematic, let's practice scanning for opportunities and ideas that are going to allow our well-being to grow. So I thought this would be really fun to practice together here. So let's see if we can apply the Tetris effect to increase our own positivity. So one thing that we can start off with, though, is actually thinking about some of the things that we may find ourselves stuck in, like a pattern where we are maybe thinking towards the more negative state, right? So for instance, maybe, I know that this happens to me. A friend will say, hey, let's go meet up in, the city and have some dinner. And I'll go, that sounds great. But then my mind will immediately go to, oh, but I bet there's not going to be parking. Or, oh, I'm never going to find a spot. I'm going to be late. And then I'm going to get stressed out. So my mind is already, right, focused on the negative instead of going, oh my goodness, what an awesome opportunity to meet with a friend whom I haven't seen in a while. And it's going to be awesome. We're going to have fun. We're going to have great food. I could scan for those things, but instead I chose to scan for what might not work out. So let's think about that for a moment. What might be some negative thought patterns that you might want to reframe or change? And feel free to, type in the box below anything that comes up. I know for me, I definitely have got to work on my parking. I want to not worry about parking or, not having enough time for something. That's a negative pattern that I'd love to reframe. Okay, so if you have that in mind, so a negative thought pattern you want to change or reframe, let's flip it. So we're going to flip the switch here. And what positive pattern would you want to scan for instead? So I like that idea of we're retraining here, right? We're retraining our brain from a pattern to do something different, to look for something more optimistic. Okay, so we've got some people chiming in here. So, what if you're incapable of learning something, perhaps something new, or worrying about not getting a job that you really want? So yeah, those, of course, those are definitely valid thoughts and fears that come up. And I think many of us share that. So what could we flip that to? How can we flip the switch to see a more positive pattern? Oh, okay, someone else is mentioning I'm a cynical optimist. I would like to train myself to default to positive. Yeah, this is that idea. We're making a shift. Absolutely. And it can take some time. And it's okay if we notice, oh, I'm back in the negative pattern again, because habits do take time to build up. There's something in the scientific world that's called neuroplasticity. And what that means, and it's good news for all of us, is that our brain is actually very flexible. And even though we may feel like we're in a rut, or we may feel like we're just always kind of in that more negative or cynical outlook, the good news is that the more that we retrain our brains, there's actually synaptic action. So as our brain thinks about things, energy moves, right? And it actually fires up different parts in our brain, and those synapses actually start to look differently when we think different patterns. We're actually creating new grooves in the brain when we start to shift our perspective. So if we start to have a fear like I was mentioning earlier, oh, I'm never going to get parking, it's always crowded, I'm going to be late, it's going to be stressful, I'm setting up my brain to actually start feeling that already. Remember, it hasn't happened yet that the parking issue came up, but I'm already putting myself in that situation. So by actually saying, I'm going to leave a little bit earlier, I'll have plenty of time to find parking, and if I don't, I'll call my friend, perhaps there's a second option, and I'm just going into the mindset of, this is going to be so fun. I've already changed the way that my brain is thinking. Someone else mentioned, what about putting myself out? Well, worry about putting myself out there. Absolutely, right? That's an uncertain, unknown thing, and it can feel kind of scary. So the good news about that is instead of thinking about what are some of the bad things that might happen if I put myself out there, you might start to think of, oh, what new people might I meet that I could ask really interesting questions of and get to know? Or, wow, I wonder if I put myself out there and it doesn't go so great, but I'll have some sort of lesson to learn from it. So either way, it's going to benefit me, right? So there's some ways that we can work with some of those feelings that come up. These are great, by the way. Thank you so much for sharing. Anyone else want to chime in about a new thing that they want to change, or a way that we can start scanning for positive? Okay, it can be our new pastime here. As we're physically isolating, we can start playing the Tetris Effect, but with positivity. Awesome. Okay. So I'm going to switch gears again just a little bit and talk about this concept of in the flow. So an additional aspect of positive psychology is this idea of being in a state known as flow, where I like to call it, and I know a lot of people have mentioned this as well, but that sense of being in the zone, perhaps like you get absorbed into a really cool art project and hours go by, and it might even just feel like minutes. Or maybe you're in a really amazing book and you can't believe, by the time you look up from the page that some hours have gone by. It's that state of being focused and having a deep concentration, but you're not straining, and there's not a huge source of stress. And so this is a part of positive psychology that was really fascinating, that a particular psychologist wanted to study. And his name is Dr. Csikszentmihalyi. And he actually wrote 3 different books on the state of flow. So if you're interested in this topic, he's a really great resource about some of those studies. But anyhow, in 1998, he found that flow states are actually linked to a greater sense of happiness, well-being, academic and career success, along with more positive and healthy relationships. So what I was curious about is if anyone wanted to share about experiences of being in the flow. I know for myself, when I am doing something I really enjoy, like I love to do Qigong. And when I'm doing some of those exercises, I really notice that my mind gets to a really relaxed place. And I'm not thinking about all the worries I have or the problems that are going on, but I'm just really in it. I'm in the moment and things are moving. I truly feel like I'm flowing. And there's just this sense of the world just opening up and feeling really good. And I love that state. And I would say for me, that's a flow state. So, oh, wait, we have some folks chiming in. So when someone's dancing and music is blasting, oh, absolutely. Music totally, I think, is a huge way of just getting in the flow. when I'm reading tarot, and getting lost in the cards and meanings. Yeah, right? Anything that we just really find ourselves getting absorbed into can bring us to that state of flow. I love that. That's really great. Anyone else want to chime in? What helps get you into the flow? Oh, working with soil. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Working with, elementals and maybe gardening, it's such a wonderful way to connect with the earth and the planet. Yeah, and it grounds you. Absolutely. Beautiful. So, what I wanted to just offer about this concept of flow is not only just to tell you a little bit more about the field of positive psychology, but that, in times like this, when I know things are uncertain, I know there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot going on. If we can find some things that help us get into that flow state, we can really, help our sense of well-being. Yeah, and feel more positive, and then hopefully we can pass that on to others. When we're in a state that feels really good, we can be more positive around the folks that we care about in our communities. Okay, so unless there's other questions, I want to open it up to just some thoughts about the Happiness Advantage. As I mentioned, there's a lot of wonderful resources out there. The Happiness Advantage is one book that I highly recommend. Dr. Csikszentmihalyi, his book's on flow. His first book is actually just called Flow, so it's easy to look up if you're interested. I mentioned something about neuroplasticity. I want to mention that there's some wonderful books out there on that as well, if that was something that interested you. There's a book by Dr. Norman Deutsch is his name, and he talks about the adaptability of the brain. So if you wanted to search that. Something else that I wanted to mention about flow is that it's also been shown to help people who are like scientifically oriented and inventing and engineering. One of our most famous scientists of all times and inventors was Nikola Tesla. And there's a really beautiful story about Tesla, about how he actually discovered his really big, career-defining invention, which was alternating current. And he was actually on a walk in Budapest with a very good friend of his, and they were absorbed in a discussion about poetry. And during their talk about poems and poetry, he was so inspired. He looked up, the sun was shining, and in his mind, and this is from his biography, he had this vision of the sun and this machinery that had alternating currents. And immediately he just was in this flow state and it all clicked. And he got so excited, he turned to his friend and he said, "Do you see what I see?" And his friend's going, the sun? It's very bright. But Tesla actually had this moment of, no, I understand how to do this and I see it so clearly. And he was so absorbed in that moment, he was able to, without taking any notes, begin his building of this alternating current, which of course changed our society with the power and electrical and what we use today. So flow states are really powerful. So I just wanted to leave you with that story because I don't know, that really was profound for me. So lastly, I wanted to read a little quote here from the Happiness Advantage. So this is from Sean Achor, and he says, "When we are positive, our brains become more engaged, creative, motivated, energetic, resilient, and productive. This discovery has been repeatedly supported by research and neuroscience, management studies, and bottom lines of organizations around the world." So not only does it pay to help shift our state into happiness for our own well-being, but it has such a ripple effect throughout, our communities and friends and loved ones, our businesses, and beyond. So I'm really glad that we got to spend some time here together talking about this topic. And I would love to open it up for any questions if anyone else would like to ask anything in particular. It's definitely a topic that I have a lot of passion for, and so I can spend many hours talking about it. But if there are no additional questions, then I'd love to turn it back over to Ashley and see if she had anything to add for our presentation today.
Hi. Who was the individual that wrote the flow book again? Somebody asked that.
Oh, yes. So he has quite a long name. So what I'll do is
Yeah, it's impossible to pronounce.
yeah. So his name is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And I did have to look up how to pronounce that. So that is the spelling of his name. And he has 3 different books. He has, in 1998, he wrote a book called Finding Flow. The second one in 2008, a little more recent, is called Flow. He's a man of few words, apparently. And the last one, 2013, was Creativity, Flow, and the Psychology of Discovery and Invention. But if you put in his name, all 3 should pop up.
Yeah, absolutely. His work's amazing. It helps a lot of people in business and life and in everything.
Absolutely.
As you do. Well, thank you guys, everybody who attended. Thank you to Lisa for being here. Everybody that signed up and that's present here today will get a recording of this session along with a special discount, 20% off a one-on-one session with Lisa. So thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your gifts with us. We look forward to seeing you again soon, hopefully.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. And thank you all that tuned in for this call.